for many immigrants, it is safe to do this dangerous journey to cross many borders, to cross deserts, to cross rivers, to go to ICE detention centers, to go through all this suffering. That is better than staying in their home country. Their lives are in danger and they are in a survivor mode.
Hello, sweet friends. I'm Stephanie Jacobs, a storyteller and advocate for social justice, and your host of the Love Light Stories podcast, a place where we uncover a deeper understanding of humanity through beautiful, redemptive stories that inspire our hearts. If you long to see more love, empathy, and true connection in our world and your own life, you're in the right place. After spending multiple years studying social justice issues, I've realized the power story has in helping us to understand, empathize, and transform our worldviews into something that's just that, views that are truly worldly. Here in this space, we'll embrace our humanity through raw and authentic stories told by real people themselves. We'll amplify their voices and learn to connect in more meaningful ways. Poverty, human trafficking, incarceration, race, immigration, and more. We'll embrace difficult conversations, sometimes controversial topics, and lighthearted stories too. If you wish to uncover the hope, love, empathy, and connection we can find in our fellow humanity, this is a show for you. So, are you ready, lovely? Let's jump in. Well, hello there, lovely. Welcome back to the Love Light Stories podcast, where we create space for real personal stories to be seen, heard, and understood. If you haven't yet, be sure to rate the show, follow, and share it with your family and friends. Today on the podcast, I'm welcoming Amilcar Valencia. He is the executive director of El Refugio, an organization that offers mental, emotional, and physical support to immigrants in detention and their families. They host families at their hospitality house, visit people in detention, provide post-release support, and educate and advocate for reform of the U.S. detention system. The U.S. has the largest immigration detention system in the world, and Stewart is the largest immigration detention facility in the country. In this conversation, I'm sitting down with Amilcar to better understand the topic of immigration in the U.S. from the perspective of the immigrant, while also seeing a behind-the-scenes look at what happens in our detention centers. The topic of immigration is very complex. It's a difficult topic to discuss because there's so much to consider from both sides of the issue. In recent years, border control and immigration has been a huge issue in the United States, and as such, we are not out to solve it in this episode by any means. While this episode is not an all-encompassing episode, it provides a glimpse into the other side of the issues we hear less about. Here, we are just beginning the conversation in a way that helps us better understand. When we can understand, we can better empathize, and when we can empathize, we can have more informed conversations and make better informed decisions. That's what this episode is all about, simply understanding the perspective of the immigrant and their experiences in U.S. detention centers so that we can be better informed on this side of the issue. In this conversation, we discuss the inhumane treatment immigrants endure both on their journey to the United States and once they arrive to U.S. detention centers. Admittedly, some of what you learn will be horrifying and sad, but that's not the end of the story. El Refugio is walking alongside immigrants in detention daily and advocating for their dignity and rights in regular success. It's a true story of overcoming darkness and bringing light to families here in the United States. I met Amilcar in 2019 after visiting an immigrant detained at Stewart Detention Center. I had the chance to visit El Refugio's beautiful hospitality house and get a better understanding of their critical work, With each interaction since, it's clear that Amilcar is an incredibly dedicated and passionate advocate for the dignity of those seeking a better life in America. Here's my conversation with Amilcar. Well, hello, Amilcar. Thank you so much for joining me on the Love Light Stories podcast today. It is a joy. I know we've been in touch the last couple of years, and I've had a chance to go see the work that you do in detention centers and even visit one in South Georgia. Oh, and your hospitality house. You have so much going on. Can you share a little bit about El Refugio and how that all began?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. It's really great to reconnect with you again, but also share with your audience a little more about what we do. El Refugio, or the Refuge in English, is an organization that was founded in 2010 to support immigrants who are in deportation proceedings, who are currently detained at the Stewart Detention Center, which is located in Southwest Georgia, very close to the Alabama border, 2.5 hours from the city of Atlanta. And through that process, we support immigrants who are detained, as I mentioned, support their loved ones who come to visit them. We partner with different groups to make sure that we are doing whatever it takes to be present, to accompany people who are going through these proceedings, and also shed a light into what really happens in detention and how their lives are impacted by our current immigration and deportation system in the United States. So that's our work, and in simple words, just to accompany, to support people who are going through this very painful, probably the most difficult time of their lives while they're in detain or while they have loved ones detained at Stewart. And our role is to be there, to be present, to accompany them. Again, as I said, educate people about this issue and do something about it. That's our goal. We wanted to be active in making sure that others know about and also advocating to put an end to this system.
Right. And your work is so incredibly important, both on the side of helping the immigrant themselves, but also the advocacy work. And migration and immigration has been such a hot topic in the United States for the last couple of years. And it's a double-edged sword, if you will. But I think one thing is we don't fully understand the topic of immigration and what people perhaps go through in that process and why they're migrating in the first place. And I know personally, when I came across El Refugio and visited the detention center, it was such an eye-opening experience. I couldn't believe that it was something that was happening an hour or so from my door, but I didn't know much about it. So can you share a little bit with everyone why people migrate in the first place? Like, what are the main reasons that you're seeing immigrants migrate to the U.S.?
Well, that's important question because, as you mentioned, often people just get a piece of the pie, and you were mentioning that, understanding what is happening with immigrants here in the United States, and then we only see like kind of tiny piece of it, but sometimes we fail to understand what happens before the journey to get here, right? Or why is it that they're coming to the United States? And there are many reasons. So everyone as a human being have the right to migrate, but in this country, right, and there are particular laws that allow certain people to come into the United States through certain processes. And there is a good amount of people, and mainly people from Latin America, from Africa and the Caribbean, who are less likely to be accepted through a legal process to come to the United States. So often people don't have the ability to say, I just gonna, get a visa and go to the United States, and then maybe when I'm there, I'm gonna file for something and see if I can stay there, right? That doesn't happen if you're someone from El Salvador, Guatemala, or another country in Latin America, or Haitians, for example, people from Jamaica. So it's very complicated, that there is not many process, or the process are limited to come here legally to the United States. I think that's what sometimes people say. Well, why don't people go to the line, right? Why people come the right way? In reality is that there is no line for a lot of people. That's just put it simple. There's no line for people to come here legally. And when their lives are threatened, or their lives are in danger, people don't have the luxury to wait for that. People flee because of poverty, persecution, war, the violence in our the countries in Latin America, but of course in other countries as well. People coming here because they're seeking protection. People are coming to the United States because they see this country, right? And we say that as a country, like a country of freedom, and the American dream, right? But the reality is that that American dream, or that opportunities are not for everyone when it comes to immigration, for example, or people who come here from other countries. To put it simple, like, we have a lot of people lately from Nicaragua who come to the United States seeking asylum. So Nicaraguans, for those who know the reality in Nicaragua right now, is political situation very unstable. I mean, we had, all people in Nicaragua have, these political persecution for those who are organizing against the government, and people have to, people are being killed, people are being jailed because they're protesting the government in Nicaragua. We have a lot of Haitians who come here, and we know that Haitians have also a very, very troubled political situation in their country. There's also a lot of poverty. The president was recently killed. There is a lot of uprising, jailing people. So people have to leave, right, the country, and when they come to United States, they come here because they seek that protection. They seek what we call asylum, or person who is wanting to be protected because of their reality in their home country. There are people who come here because, again, political situation, violence, war. There are people who come to United States because of their identity. So, people are being persecuted because, maybe they're LGBTQ, and then they, not only that they're not feel accepted, right, or bullied, this is more than, they're very persecuted because who they are, or, people with, some different religious beliefs are also persecuted. So there is just a wide range of reasons why people come to United States, and currently that is, we've seen Haitians, as I said, Colombians. The reality in South America is very unstable right now. And to put it simple, this country also has something to do. Our foreign policy has affected directly what happened in those countries, and people are fleeing. We are also starting to see people who are fleeing because climate change, right? Because of they're being directly impacted by that. So they're just different, just many, many reasons why people come here, because maybe their loved ones are here already, and they just want to be reunited with their loved ones. And that's the reason that they come here. When there is no process, or there is no line, people have to go through more dangerous ways to come here. And unfortunately, our current laws since 1996, every person who comes to our border, even if they're seeking protection, they will be detained and processed for deportation. That's what our current law says.
Right. I've heard it said too before that people don't want to leave their home country often. I mean, that's what they know, that's where they've grown up, that's where their families are, their friends, and they're most of the time leaving because they have to, and it's not necessarily a choice that they have in their minds. Would you say that that is pretty accurate a lot of the time?
I'm an immigrant myself. I came here in 2010 to United States, and I completely agree with that. Personally, I just didn't I didn't want to leave my country. I was fine in my country, in my community, what I know, right? And I know so many people, so many friends who, I mean, their life is there, their family is there, their work is there, everything. But when all of that is taken away, or your life is in danger, or your family is in danger, there is no choice for you. There is no options, and people are basically forced to leave their country, and that's the reality. Of course, there's other people who migrate, and maybe they do have the chance to come with a visa, and then it's a different process. But the vast majority of immigrants who go through this long journey to get here, like cross many borders to get here, and then go through the U.S.-Mexico border, they just are again don't have the opportunity to come here legally, and then just finding ways to get here and to be protected, or again reunite with their loved ones.
Right. I don't know if I've realized that you were an immigrant yourself. That is so interesting. It makes a lot of sense. Was your journey difficult to the United States yourself?
Not personally. I will not say that my journey to United States was difficult, and I will say that this is probably the rare cases when people can migrate here legally to the United States. I do have a lot of family who migrated here during the Civil War in El Salvador. My mom actually left El Salvador when I was about 2 years old because of the Civil War in El Salvador during 1980s. And that's the reason she came. And many other, I mean, more than 1 million Salvadorans left El Salvador during that time. Many of them came to United States seeking protection because, again, we were in a civil war in El Salvador. But I personally had not had that experience of a long journey or crossing borders in that way. But I do know my everyone in my family who is here in the United States, and I will say that I have a lot of loved ones here, and not in Georgia, but in New York and other states as well. All of them crossed the border. All of them came because there was no opportunities for them to come here legally. Most of them are still undocumented. Some of them have been able to obtain a green card, or a few of them are U.S. citizens now. But I have loved ones who still don't have any documents and can be detained and can be deported anytime.
That's so scary. Wow. That's probably part of what has led you to do this work in your professional life, I would assume, is just that background and experiencing it personally.
Exactly. Yeah, I think for me it's clear that not only my family, but a lot of friends. I mean, my people, right? I'm speaking about Salvadorans, but from Latin America who have had to leave our homelands because of our homeland is not safe anymore, or offers no opportunities for you. Then people have to leave. So for me, it's clear that that's a motivation for me to do this work. But if you see it when you're here and you see the pain, the suffering, everything that people go through, I don't think you can turn away from that after you hear those experiences, after you hear those stories, after you accompany people who had loved ones who had been deported. Maybe they went and visited their loved ones at the detention center, and that was probably the last time they're seeing their loved ones. Maybe for their entire life, maybe for many years, kids who have been separated from them, and of course the pain and suffering that people go through in detention, the people who died in detention, the people who died in the journey to get here is something that I'm clear that this is a system that is inhumane and is unnecessary, and we need to do something to end it.
Right. Wow. Can you share with us a little bit about what it is like along the journey coming here? Any stories that you have heard or anything like that?
Yeah, of course there is. I mean, there's so many stories of people who have made that journey here again for those reasons that we already mentioned. People had to go to, if you're from Central America, you had to at least cross three borders to get here. You had to go to Honduras, Guatemala, or even El Salvador, and then through Mexico. Most people do that journey, maybe in bus and other ways of transportation. But there is just a ton of people who actually do this journey walking pretty much the whole time. There is people have probably familiar with the different caravans of people who were coming like from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador in the recent years. That is specifically what people do. People don't have the money, the funds, and they travel together because it's safe for them. They had to encounter not only authorities along the way, like the police or wherever immigration police is in their countries, like in Guatemala and Honduras, and they had to go through all of that. And sometimes there are not only seen as someone who is here and suspiciously, but also sometimes are detained, right, and are placed in detention as well, or are detained and sent back to their country and deported from those countries. And that happened to many people. And when they get to, they had to go through also dangerous path, right? Many people who come here and document, they had to pay a coyote, right, to can help them and guide them through the desert to get to the United States. And it is a very, very dangerous journey that people go through because they go through rivers. Many people who do make it, they died in rivers, they drown in rivers, they died of thirst in the desert, they get lost. There is just so many documented death along the border. And people do that because that is better than staying in their home country. So I don't know if people can understand that, because if you never had the need, if all your needs have been met all your life, that you have what you need, your family is with you, you never had the need to leave your house, right? People won't understand that for many immigrants, it is safe to do this dangerous journey to cross many borders, to cross deserts, to cross rivers, to go to ICE detention centers, to go all through all this suffering. That is better than staying in their home country. Their lives are in danger, and they are in a survivor mode to seek that safety, that protection that they need. And that's why people are coming here. Of course, not the whole reason, or everyone has the same reasons, but that is the story of people who come here to the United States to do, again, to live here, to feel safe, feel protected, to be reunited with their loved ones.
Mm. Just the fact of people taking the risk of death the whole journey and basically doing whatever it takes to try to get here, knowing that they might never make it, is a picture of desperation, essentially. And it really does put it into context, I think, for helping us understand, hopefully, what it could be like and how desperate, I guess, they really are to make a change and find a safer, better place to live. We've had a lot of border issues recently in the United States, and so much controversy and all of that. We have policies that make migrants take some of the most dangerous routes to enter the U.S. You kind of just touched on that a little bit, but is there anything else, like specifically with the border issues, just to provide a little bit more context to our conversation?
Yeah, definitely. So, we kind of touched that real quick, but there's, again, when we have policies in the United States that, one, we have, the border has been built up like a huge fence, right, and continues to build, like during the last administration. This is not something new. It happens, over a few decades. It started to happen a few decades ago. But, there is more civilians at the border. There is more apprehensions at the border. So those who come here are looking, I go through the most dangerous routes. And then for example, policies like remaining Mexico that was implemented by the Trump administration, or zero tolerance, right? And also during Trump's administration, Title 42, which is basically close the border for anyone because of health, quote, like, opening here, like quotation marks, right? Because of keeping our country safe against COVID, right? But we know that all those policies were not about specifically COVID safety. It was about actually keeping certain people out. So all those policies had make it in and over, like the border construction and more surveillance, more CBP officer patrolling the border. makes it more difficult for people. So people go different routes. And unfortunately, we mentioned the many documented deaths at the border. Just recently, we had these many immigrants from Mexico, Guatemala, some from El Salvador and Honduras who died in this truck ride in San Antonio. Those are the consequences of border policies that don't see the full picture of the full reality of migration, immigrants, and what happens in our countries, instead of actually allowing people to come here and allowing them to do what the law actually mandates. Our laws, like this is not, of course, international laws says that immigrants should be able to go through a process and then determine whether they could remain in the country, right, as asylum, do the thing that is legally right. And then these current policies that some of them have been thankfully struck down by the current administration, but some of them still remain, like Title 42, are making their journey much more difficult, and we see the consequences on more death of immigrants coming to the United States. So what happens at the border affects the whole immigration process here, and sometimes we are very removed, right? We here in Georgia, people in other states are removed from that reality, but we still see it. Like we still see people who are detained at the border and are sent to Stewart, and we're dealing with trying to find out how this person was detained. What is the process? Can this person be released on bond, on parole, or other means of release? But we sometimes are, if you don't do this work, you're just completely removed, and then you just believe whatever two sentences news channel says about the border, and we don't fully understand how the life of immigrants are put in danger, and how many people actually have died because of our border policies.
Yes. And clearly our border policies have brokenness in them. It's a system that is broken and not perfect and just has a lot of room for improvement. And I think that's why this has been such a hot topic, because on the other side of it, we have people, concerned about like, how do we manage who is coming and going past the borders, and how do we like worrying about drug cartels or trafficking across the border and different things to try to regulate that. And I think a lot of people would say these policies are trying to also regulate those things. Do you have any, this is a loaded question, and I definitely didn't ask you this before, so I just want to get your perspective, because this podcast is all about just perspectives and sharing new things and learning alongside of each other. So do you have any suggestions or thoughts of how to create a better process for immigrants, a more humane process, while also protecting the border from unintended consequences of just having an open border?
Yeah, definitely a great question. And I think that, again, if we just see one side of things, right? Sometimes we just say, oh, well, there is criminals entering our border, and there is drugs, and there is all of this. But we also don't talk about how, for example, our policies in the United States, like everyone can purchase a rifle in the United States, and then those arms, those guns are also trafficked back to Mexico and into, it's a full circle of like what happened here also affects the reality of people and affects why people are migrating, right? So we need to see the issue in a more holistic way, because it's not just the border issue or our border policies. Is also what happens here, how it affects the communities and why people are migrating to the United States. But going back to the question, I think when there are conversations about the border, everyone has an opinion, even people who doesn't understand the border. I think the first thing that we need to do when it comes to border conversations, we need to let border communities talk and decide how they want the border to be secure, or how the border needs to be managed, because the border is more than just a piece of land where there is fence, anything like that. It's the communities that are being directly impacted by, what happens at the border. So I think the very least thing, the very first thing we need to do is to make sure that those communities who are directly impacted by the border have a say on how our border policies need to be changed or implemented in a way. I know that the United States has policies that make it, again, very difficult for people, that we're doing everything that we can as a country, or our laws allow, to stop migration in a very big scale. And I think there is so many other countries who have policies that are humane, that allow people to go through a process, that allow people who are seeking protection, who are seeking asylum, but people who are coming here because they just want to better for themselves, for their communities, for their families, and everyone should have that opportunity, right? We believe that migration is a human right, and then you should be able to move freely to another country. I understand that there is laws, and then there is things that there is processes, but what we have here is completely inhumane and doesn't take into account the reality of the people who are coming here. And we only focus on the enforcement piece of it. Even when we talked about, when there are conversations in Congress about immigration reforms, the very first thing that Democrats and everyone else, right, it says is that, well, we need to secure the border first. And I think that we're starting just by the wrong topic of conversation. We need to see human beings first, and then come up with policies that allow us to honor their dignity, their autonomy, and their rights before even coming up with policies that are actually not the solution to the problems. There is having a 18, 25 feet long tall border won't stop the migration of the people. People will still come here, even if the border is completely sealed on the southern border. Another thing, we always talk about borders in the southern context, never about the north side of the border. And I think that says a lot about how we see and then the kind of people we're trying to stop to come into the United States. And again, we haven't mentioned these, but our border policies, our immigration policies, our detention and deportation process are racist. And again, we're just trying to stop certain people to come here while allowing people from other countries that is not Latin America to come here. White people immigrants are more accepted to come here than immigrants from Haiti, for example, or the Caribbean or Latin America.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that. That's a really good point. And I liked your answer in general, like honoring dignity first and looking at the person and seeing what is it that we need to do to honor humanity. And I mean, we live in a global world and we have countries that we're responsible for our own country and managing that and keeping everybody quote unquote safe or whatever it might be. But at the same hand, we're all God's people. And it really makes one think, why are we keeping some people out and others not?
Yeah, I think, and then I know we're talking a lot about this issue, but I think it's important. Just to put an example, right? We have seen I think every person who comes here who has concern, who are fleeing violence, war, persecution, people should have the right to be accepted and being able to even, people don't actually need to, and this is for everyone, people don't need to be detained. People can go through a process of immigration process without being detained. But that's not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on the apprehension, detention piece, and deportation. But going back to example, we know how horrible the reality for people in Ukraine it is, and people are fleeing the war in Ukraine. And there is so many people Ukrainians who have come through the U.S.-Mexico border or through other port of entry seeking protection, right? And they're getting that protection. In the last couple of months, April, May, there were more than 26,000 Ukrainians accepted, and none of them were detained. None of them were incarcerated. In the same period, we have deported more than 26,000 Haitians. So just to put it in perspective, how racist our policies are. Yes, I believe we should welcome Ukrainians. We should welcome, anyone who is fleeing war persecution. But what about people in Haiti? What about Colombians? What about Venezuelans? What about Nicaraguans? They are being deported in masses, right? Many, many people. And then not only they're being deported, they're not being accepted, but people who have claimed they're fleeing persecution because of their political stance, and then they will face consequences when they get to Nicaragua because they're being directly raising their voice against the government. They fled, seek protection in the United States. They're being deported. And when you're deported, you are telling, like the United States is telling the country, like Nicaragua, here, we're sending you these people. And then the first thing that can happen to someone is being jailed and being persecuted because they are dissidents of the government. So not only we're deporting people, detaining and causing so much pain while they're here, not giving them any chances, but also sending them to maybe indefinite detention. Who else? What else?
We've talked a lot about that, the inhumanity of detention. And let's dive into that. Let's go ahead first. Explain what the detention systems are, how they operate, who owns them, what people are experiencing in detention, because that was so eye-opening to me.
Yeah, and I'll go back to what you said at the beginning. Like I didn't have any idea. Like this was an hour from from where I lived. I didn't know how immigrants are being treated in this process. And I think that speaks to the reality that often people have assumptions and many times uninformed knowledge about immigrants or immigration, or misinformed reality of immigration because they don't know. And I think what we've been doing the last 10 years as an organization, of course, we first thing is to see every person as a full human being with dignity and respect. They should be treated as such. That's not something that we see that happens in the detention centers. But when we do that and we bring people to the detention center, it awakens people. People can see how someone who is, again, seeking protection, maybe someone who has been here their entire life, or maybe grew up Georgia or in North Carolina, their whole life is here, family, their work, everything. And now they're being isolated from their community. They're being detained. They're not only just that piece of being isolated is inhumane, but they also go through so many other things in terms of abuse inside of the detention center and neglect inside of the detention center. And there's so many stories about this, unfortunately, well documented, not only by El Refugio, but many other organizations here in Georgia. But if you Google Stewart Detention Center, there will be many, many stories about abuses that people go through in detention. And many times there are no investigations for what happened inside of these detention centers. I think to put it into a broader context, the United States is the country with the biggest incarceration population in the world. And 25% of the people incarcerated around the world are actually incarcerated here in the United States. That's huge. And that's because we have a criminal justice system that focus on criminalization, not in reforming, right? Or those who go through whatever process because of their history is not focused on making sure that the people come better, or that they change, right? Because the system is not to do that. It's just to punish people. The immigration detention system is part of that broken system that like channels, like it has a process to detain thousands of people every day. In the United States, there is more than 200 or about 200 facilities like Stewart, or localities too, like city jails or county jails, that rent a space to immigration to detain immigrants. So anyone who comes through this process, either because they had an encounter with the local police, whatever it was, maybe no license or driving without a license or no tail light, wherever it was, but because they are immigrants, they are put into jail and then detention proceedings, deportation proceedings. People who are crossing the border again, asylum seekers, people who are seeking protection, people who are seeking to be reunited with their loved ones, they will be detained. And we're talking about, in the recent years, a system that has detained in 2019 is the highest peak of the number of people detained daily under immigration customs enforcement, about 52,000 people detained in immigration detention center, which is an insane number. Who owns it? Yeah, immigration is the government entity in charge of managing this, but immigration, the government doesn't have owns all these facilities. So they just have contracts, again, counties, localities, or corporations like Core Civic, which is the one that manages the Stewart Detention Center. A corporation like Core Civic, there are a few more like Geo and others that are in the business of detaining people. And when I'm saying they are in the business of detaining people, that's exactly what they do. They make profits for detaining every person. They get pay for every person in bed in their facility, and it's a business model for them. It's like a hotel, right? If you're a hotel owner, you want your rooms to be filled every night, and that's how you make money. So there is also that incentive to have more space, more availability, so more people are detained in this process, and then we have more policies that allow collaboration with the police, more border apprehensions, and transfer from other state facilities to immigration detention centers. Because again, the incentive for these corporations is profit and cutting cost. You saw that one at Stewart. At Stewart, visitation is non-contact. When you visit someone in detention, it's non-contact. There is a glass window, and then the person has, on the other side of the window, has a phone. You have a phone, and that's how you talk to the person. This, first of all, is inhumane, right? We see how in state facilities people are able to have chairs and tables and hug their loved ones. That doesn't happen in immigration detention center. Most of them don't have contact visits. And why is that in the context of profit? Well, they don't have to have an extra guard in the facility to be there and serve, or at least be present, right, when the visitation is happening. So there is no guards doing that. There are people who are detained have shared with us how many times their medical needs are not met. If they get sick with simple like things like you need to be treated by maybe a nurse, you don't have to go to outside doctor, it still takes you several days before you're called to go to the medical unit inside of the detention center. But if you're someone who has a chronic disease like diabetes, heart problems, or anything of that nature, you use, someone who has diabetes has to have a schedule when they have to have their medication, and then they have to check their sugar levels constantly. And there are many cases where people have unmanaged diabetes, and in many cases, people have been, a person who we advocated for, were visiting and were in contact with their loved ones, lost vision for some time, had numbness on his legs. So diabetes was unmanaged. Sometimes he was like more than 400 levels of sugar in his body. They were giving him bread and pasta, a lot of carbs. The food that he was getting was not appropriate. Instead of giving him fruits, they were giving him applesauce, which also has a lot of concentrated sugar. Things like that, like people who needed surgeries for months and months just didn't receive any attention until they're almost bursting, right? Or, person who had a real emergency situation of a surgery was not treated for many, many, many months until that person was about to collapse or, almost died in the detention center. That's when you're taken to the hospital. That's when you are being seen by outside doctor. And that's super inhumane. And those just to mention a few things. I mean, there is realities of stories that we know of people who have been attacked as well inside of the detention center. The use of force. So when someone says maybe feel that they've not been listened, or they haven't seen the immigration officer, and no one is, getting to their aid when they need support. There are people who have done peaceful protest. And then what is the response from the facility? They have a specialized unit, like it was a SWAT, right? Canine unit, kind of like that, go and basically disperse anyone who is protesting, attack them with rubber bullets, gas, pepper gas, or pepper bombs. And people have, there's documented stories of that. A person that I was talking to the phone, he said that this was during COVID. He was concerned that he had COVID. He had all the symptoms. He never received any medication. He complained it several times. He asked to go to the medical unit, and they never allowed him to do that. Finally, days after, he was taken to the unit, but it was told that, I'm sorry, there is no medication. We cannot do anything. You had to go back to your unit. And he did just something very simple. He refused to get up from the chair and just stay there as a protest because he wanted to receive attention. He felt he had, trouble breathing, he had pain in his chest, had all of these problems, and they were not paying attention to that. So he did this simple protest, right, in order to be listened. And guards came, they slammed his face on the floor. He almost lost his vision because of that. And then he was attacked and then placed in solitary confinement because he was doing what any person should be able to do, demand to be seen right by a doctor or just claiming their rights. He was attacked, he was placed in solitary confinement, and then he was deported with these scars on his face and never got any apologies, any treatment, any investigations for the treatment he received by the guards in the detention center. So it's just, unfortunately, so many stories of suffering, pain, people who have died in the detention center for things that should be treated. People should not die of pneumonia. No one dies by pneumonia. There is the statistics by the CDC are very low of people who die in pneumonia, and most of them who have very elderly or have many other lung problems. But someone who is 33 years old should never have died by pneumonia. But this happened at Stewart Detention Center. A Cuban man died of pneumonia because just didn't receive the proper attention.
Are you loving this episode? Come join us in the Love Light Stories Facebook community, where we make this show come to life. My goal is to make this more than a podcast and truly create a space where we can learn and grow alongside one another in community. Here, we can learn alongside each other with curiosity and humility, and ultimately emulate more love and light to all we meet. You'll be the first to know about upcoming coffee chats, in-person events, book studies, and more. It's here where we'll go deeper in discussion around the topics we explore on the show. You'll even have the chance to meet guests from time to time. Go to stephaniemjacobs.com/manifesto to join. You'll receive an instant download of our manifesto with access to the community. Oh, and did I mention it's all free? So what are you waiting for? Come join us. I just can't wait to meet you, lovely. There's so much that I want to talk about in this episode on this topic of immigration and detention. And I had the chance to visit with El Refugio, Stewart Detention Center, and got to spend an hour with an immigrant who had crossed oceans and countries, spent 9 months trying to get here. And just talking with him, he was in tears, saying that he would rather die than go back to his country. And he had left his country out of desperation. He was seeking asylum, and only to be met here in the United States, where he thought he would, if he made it here, he could start his life again, was met with detention. And I think he was in there for a year and a half before he was deported. And in talking to him and visiting Stewart, it just really opened my eyes to know that this is a for-profit entity across the country, and Stewart specifically. And I learned too, correct me if I'm wrong, but that Stewart Detention Center was created as a prison initially and lost their contract. And so it turned into a detention center. So not only are these people who are not criminals necessarily. They're coming for other reasons. They're detained as immigrants. They're kept in a prison and treated like prisoners. And like you said, it was when I visited with the immigrant that I met, we were between glass with a phone, just like in a prison. And to learn how, like you say, inhumane we're treating these people who essentially need help and are like desperate for help to live, to fleeing for safety. It just really opened my eyes. And to hear in the detention center, like people getting sick from the water and food that is not enough and not substantive. And there's just so many accounts. And perhaps I can link a few different reports or at least some information on Stewart Detention Center in the show notes of this episode. So those listening, if you're interested, you can dive deeper into this topic because it's very eye-opening and it's not something that I think we understand enough about. And even understanding immigration, personally, I believe it is that double-edged sword. Like there needs to be some sort of policies to be able to manage immigration in a humane and appropriate way and manage borders and everything, because we can't have the whole world living in the United States, right? But the reality is the whole world doesn't want to live in the United States. A lot of people are happy where they are, and those that have to leave are leaving for good reasons because they feel forced to a lot of times. So it's just a very difficult topic. But at the end of the day, I feel like what this episode is about is just understanding immigration better, because as you were saying, we don't understand it. And when we don't understand, we can't empathize. We can't make informed decisions. We can't have informed conversations. This is definitely not an all-encompassing episode by any means, but hopefully it starts the conversation to understand that differently. So real quick, Amilcar, I want to just talk a little bit about and ask you to share more about El Refugio, just briefly circling back how you come alongside immigrants to support them through this immigration process, and maybe a specific example how you've been able to help someone and help them find that light, because this whole issue isn't just, while it's a tough issue, there is progress being made, which is so exciting. And you are right on the front lines making that happen.
Yeah. The work that we do, as we said at the beginning, is really to see people as they are, as a human being, accompany them. But what that really means, we kind of touched on this topic before, like we had done accompaniment visits at the detention center. That's something that very concrete thing that we do, to visit those who are detained, to understand, their stories, their struggles. Some people share these horrible things with us, but some people just want to have that human connection. They just want to have someone from the outside who comes again and sees them as persons, as human beings, and have that connection. And that's a very concrete thing that we do at the detention center, bring people to this space to encounter that person, to see that person, to learn from them. And that hopefully allows people like you, Stephanie, and others to have a broader understanding of the issue of immigration detention. That's, I think, key for our work. It's just making sure that we establish relationship with people first. We have a hospitality house as well. So families of individuals, people who are detained at Stewart, can stay at our house for free, and we offer meals and support, friendship while they're at the house. And the house again offers free lodging to them while they visit their loved ones. At Stewart, people only are allowed to receive one visit per week. So 1 hour visit a week. So most of the times their families come on weekends and do visits. Unfortunately, throughout this pandemic, these two particular things that we do, hospitality and visitation, have been suspended because until today there is no visitation happening at Stewart Detention Center. But we hope that we will continue to do that in the near future. What we have been able to do during the pandemic is to open a helpline for people. So people in the detention center, loved ones too, can contact us. And that's how now we get more information about what's happening, connecting with them, making sure that we're there to just to let them know that we're here and that we listen and that we want to elevate their stories. Through that, we've been able to put commissary support, people and especially in the pandemic, people didn't have any PPE items, mask or soap or hand sanitizers, and most of them said we like to have, some funds in order to purchase some of these things. And then we started to put in funds into their commissary, and then we had done that and continue to do that. We send donation of clothing as well, along with we partner with another organization in Americus, Georgia, which is about 45 minutes away, Koinonia Farm, and they are the ones who come and bring the bags of clothing for those who maybe be deported and they want to at least have a change of clothes and shoes when they're sent back, or if they're released, right? They don't have any other clothing. Maybe they were detained at the border, or maybe here and they were detained and they didn't have anything. Like when I'm outside, I don't carry any other change of clothing with me. And if you're traveling, crossing borders, that clothes or shoes might be in good shape, and they want to have something when they go back. So we do that for families. We send books as well. So a lot of books for people who are detained, who want to. There is a library in the detention center, but it's limited in what materials they have, and especially in their own language. So a lot of people want to read, just have something else to do besides being there or watching TV or watching the news or doing some exercises. They also want to read and educate themselves. Many people ask for English learning books, dictionaries, and we send those. People ask for religious books as well, and we send those. With loved ones. Again, before I go to loved ones, we also advocate for people who are, again, going through this reality of maybe neglect, abuse in the detention center, and we have put many complaints out there. More recently, we just put a complaint about sexual abuse that women face at the detention center, and it's out there. People can look into that. It's for the detention center. There is a report from the Intercept about this, and then along with other organizations, we are lifting up those stories, accompanying those who are detained, those who are victims, the survivors, and advocating for them to be released. That's also important in our work, because we know that how difficult it is, and we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to go to their loved ones, go to their communities, unite with them. For families, we have a helpline and provide much needed support. That sometimes families just need information; they just don't know where is the store, what I can do I need a lawyer, how do I pay the bond, all those questions that people have. So our support is very critical, and Refugio is the only organization doing that specific work at the Stewart Detention Center. Of course, there is SPLC that provides legal support. We don't provide legal support, but we connect with them and other organizations and other pro bono lawyers that do that work. So for us, our role is, again, to see people as human beings, to support them, to elevate their stories, and make sure that we do everything we can to fight for them along their side, because that's what they want. Because we have formed those relationships with people, then we can understand a little bit better what is it that is going, what is it, what they want, and then we elevate those requests to the public and to the authorities that can do something about it.
Right. Wow. When I think of El Refugio, it's just that. It's an organization that's advocating for the human dignity of each person, and also one that is just advocating for the rights of them to be able to be treated better and to share the stories with everybody else, all of us, to be able to understand and have a window into what this issue, a deeper dive into what is happening beneath the surface that I don't think we have the opportunity otherwise to understand. So thank you so much, Amilcar. This has been so informative, and I hope for everyone listening, it has opened your eyes a bit to help you understand this issue. This is not an all-encompassing episode by any means. There's so many angles and perspectives to this issue, but this human dignity piece, from my perspective, is very hard to ignore. And if you feel the same, I would just encourage you to check out the show notes below. And Amilcar, how can they get involved with El Refugio if they would like to either learn more or do something about this issue?
Yeah, we welcome anyone who wants to get involved with El Refugio. So right now, people can visit our website, and you can include that in the notes, elrefugioministry.org or refugiosteward.org. people can also look us and follow us in our social media of Refugio at Stewart, in Instagram and Facebook. And or the work that we do. I mean, as I said, is you put it really well in terms of like advocating for people and also to being able to make sure that people are treated with dignity and respect, and these other specific things we do. And then we need to have, we are a nonprofit and we don't have government funding, we don't have grants that give us money to do this work. We really depend on the generosity of the people in the community, so you can go and donate and support our work. And if you want to learn more, go to our website. You can contact us as well if you're in Georgia or maybe you're part of a group and want to have one of us speaking at your maybe congregation, maybe your family group, friends, maybe your workplace, who maybe think that's an opportunity for other people to kind of open their eyes to this reality, or just to learn more about what is happening currently at detention centers. So be glad to connect with anyone, and then you can contact me at Amilcar at refugioministry.org, or just go to our website and you can social media and you can find a way to contact us there as well. Yeah, so there's many ways, and I know I talked a lot about policies and how many people are detained and what happens at the border. I think the main message that we want everyone to take away is that we're talking about human beings. We're not talking about the statistics or number. We're talking about people who want to be treated, to be seen as human beings. We've been advocating for someone who is currently detained at Stewart. His 10-year-old daughter wrote a letter. I'm not going to read the letter, but in the letter, she said he's a good person. His family misses him. This is a letter she wrote to the judge, giving him 10 reasons why Ricardo should be released from detention. And she's naming all these things. And one of the things she said is, I want to paint with him. I want to bake with him. And this breaks my heart. I want to have a father-daughter date with him.
Wow.
This is, again, we're talking about human beings, people whose life is upside down because we have this detention system that is dehumanizing, this process that don't see them as human beings. And our goal is to make sure that people see immigrants as people, as deserving, as complete human beings, no matter what their country of origin, the language they speak, the color of their skin. People have rights and they should be protected. They should be allowed to stay here. They should be allowed to have a process that dignifies them.
That is just an incredible ending. Thank you for sharing that. I can't imagine being that 10-year-old girl and having to write a letter like that to the judge and just wanting to have a daddy-daughter date again. Thank you, Amilcar, for everything, for sharing this perspective, for sharing the great work that you do at El Refugio, and for sharing how we can all get more involved and just share and advocate alongside of you. So thank you again, and we will talk next time.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Wow, that was a very deep discussion, and we talked about so much. If you're like me, you might be feeling all sorts of emotions with questions swirling around in your head. Are you surprised to learn how inhumanely we're treating other human beings in our own country? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? What questions do you have? Again, this is such a complex issue, a double-edged sword, if you will. It's tougher to solve from a system perspective, but from a human perspective, it's much more simple. We don't have to detain people in such horrible living conditions. We can treat them like human beings with dignity. There is something utterly broken with our detention system in the United States, and we have to do better. Of course, the first step to progress is understanding, and then advocacy, which is what this episode is all about. If you want to know more about this topic, I've linked a bunch of reports for you in the show notes. These include firsthand accounts of life in detention and stories that pull back the curtain on what's happening. They're really eye-opening, so I encourage you to check them out. Also, follow El Refugio on Instagram and Facebook at El Refugio Stewart and at their website at elrefugiostewart.org. They do a great job keeping you informed of what's happening at Stewart. And if you're in Georgia, you can even go visit an immigrant in detention and volunteer at their hospitality house like I did. If you're not in Georgia, there are detention centers all over the country, and you probably can find one that's close to you. And lastly, back to those questions you might have. If you have questions about immigration or El Refugio, thoughts, comments, any of the sort, you can submit your questions or comments one of two ways. Both are accessible via the show notes for this episode. 1, you can submit your written questions, or 2, submit your voice message via SpeakPipe. Again, links to do either are in the show notes. And if you have an idea for the show, you can submit those at the link included in the show notes too. And don't forget to follow El Refugio on Instagram and Facebook at El Refugio Stewart and at their website at elrefugiostewart.org. And again, I really do encourage you to check out the show notes to find links to reports about Stewart Detention Center so you can see for yourself what is really going on inside those walls. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast and leaning into today's story. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts so you don't ever miss an episode. And a great way you can support these conversations is to rate the show and leave a review. And if you have a friend who would like these stories, share it with them too. All of these things are the best way you can support this podcast. So thank you. And until next time, lovelies, keep radiating that love and light to everyone you meet.